Psychic stocks. Belief shapes finance.
So we're gonna try to understand this conflict as a kind of
Mm.
like an alchemical crucible,
Okay.
a place where all these powerful forces are clashing.
Yeah.
And maybe, just maybe,
Yeah.
there's some potential for transformation hidden in there.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
We're not just talking about land or politics here.
Oh.
We're talking about these deep-seated beliefs that shape reality on the ground.
Okay, so to understand this crucible,
Yeah.
we have to go back to the beginning, right? It's wild to me that both sides trace their claim to this land
Right.
back to the same dude, Abraham.
For Jewish people, the Hebrew Bible frames the land as divinely promised to Abraham and his descendants.
Yeah.
And this promise is seen as a covenant,
Uh-huh.
a binding agreement that forms the basis for their claim to the land.
So essentially it's like God said, this is your land.
That's how it's interpreted. And it's passed down through generations
Okay.
as this kind of unbreakable connection.
But then Islamic tradition views Ishmael,
Right,
Abraham's eldest son, as the rightful heir.
right.
So that already sets up a tension, right?
Yes. And he's considered an ancestor of Arabs. So
Huh.
you can see how from the very start, the land is imbued with this intense spiritual weight
Yeah.
for both sides.
It's almost like a spiritual heartland.
Exactly. And this ancient tension plays out through history.
Okay, give me an example.
The first Zionist Congress in 1897,
Uh-huh.
led by Theodor Herzl,
Okay.
he envisioned the return of Jewish people to their ancestral homeland.
And it wasn't just a political movement.
There was a mystical element to it, too.
It was deeply tied to the concept of tikkun olam.
Now, for those of us who don't know,
Right.
what is that?
Which means repairing the world.
Okay.
This idea suggests that the restoration of Israel is a step towards cosmic repair, aligning the earthly realm with a kind of divine order.
So, from a Jewish perspective, returning to the land is part of a bigger spiritual mission.
Absolutely.
But wouldn't a skeptic say this is just a way to justify taking land that's already inhabited?
That's a valid point.
Okay.
And it highlights the complexity of the situation.
Right.
There are always multiple perspectives,
Uh-huh.
and it's important to acknowledge them all.
So then you have the Balfour Declaration in 1917,
Right.
where Britain pledges support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine,
Right.
which of course creates tension with the Arab population already living there.
And this tension explodes with the UN partition plan in 1947,
Okay.
which proposed splitting Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states,
Uh-huh.
with Jerusalem as an international city because of its significance to both religions.
Yeah, that makes sense. But that didn't really go as planned, did it?
Arab leaders rejected the plan,
Okay.
and in 1948, Israel declared independence.
Okay.
For Jewish people, this was a miraculous return after centuries of exile.
Yeah, like a modern day Exodus.
Yes, exactly.
But for Palestinians, it was the Nakba. Hundreds of thousands were displaced from their homes.
And that displacement, that sense of loss, continues to resonate today.
Yeah.
It's a wound that hasn't healed.
It makes you wonder, are these cycles of trauma just an inevitable part of human history? Or is there some way to break free from them?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
And it only becomes more complex as the conflict continues to escalate
Right.
through events like the Six-Day War in 1967, where Israel captured East Jerusalem, the West Bank, Gaza, and other territories.
Right.
Another victory for one side, but more trauma for the other.
Absolutely.
And of course, we can't forget the recent Hamas attacks
Right.
in October of 2023, where was it something like 1,400 Israelis were killed?
The attacks, which tragically killed over 1,400 Israelis, were one of the deadliest days in the country's history.
Yeah. And then the violence that followed in Gaza created a humanitarian crisis
Yes.
and increased global tension.
Absolutely.
Feels like every event, every victory, every loss just throws more fuel on the fire, making it harder and harder to imagine a way out.
Yeah, and yet, amidst all of this,
Okay.
there's this spiritual dimension that we can't ignore. It's almost like this land itself.
Okay.
This alchemical crucible we're talking about
Yeah.
is trying to forge something new out of this conflict.
Okay, so let's dive into that.
Okay.
I'm ready to get mystical.
It's like the land itself is a character in this whole story,
Right.
imbued with this profound spiritual significance for both sides. the conflict becomes a battle not just for territory,
Yeah.
but for this connection to something much larger than themselves.
Well, let's talk about those mystical dimensions.
Okay.
Our sources delve into Jewish and Islamic mysticism,
Right.
Kabbalah and Sufism.
Well, in Kabbalah, the land of Israel corresponds to Malkut,
Okay.
the earthly realm where divine energy manifests. And Jerusalem, the spiritual center, represents Yesod,
Okay.
the channel connecting the divine and material worlds.
So are you saying that from a Kabbalistic perspective, true peace in the region is somehow tied to a kind of spiritual realignment?
The ongoing conflict disrupts that flow of energy, creating spiritual disharmony.
Okay.
And Kabbalists believe that this disharmony ripples outward, impacting all of humanity. It's not just contained to that region.
That's a powerful thought.
It is.
But wouldn't both sides argue that they're trying to restore that harmony? Just in different ways.
Right.
How does that work within this Kabbalistic framework?
It's complicated, but take the concept of Shekinah in exile.
Okay.
Shekinah is the feminine presence of God, and Jewish mysticism teaches that she's exiled alongside the Jewish people. The return to Israel is about more than reclaiming a homeland.
Okay.
It's about reuniting with this divine feminine energy.
So the violence and the ongoing conflict suggests that this Shekinah is still fragmented.
Exactly. It symbolizes this state of spiritual disarray, this longing for wholeness that hasn't been fulfilled, and that sense of incompleteness can be felt by anyone regardless of their faith.
Okay.
Think about the Palestinians who have been displaced, families who have lost loved ones, the constant fear and uncertainty that permeates daily life. Shekinah in exile.
It's almost like a mirror reflecting that longing on both sides.
And that's where the idea of tikkun olam comes in.
Right, repairing the world.
Exactly. For mystics, the restoration to Israel is part of this larger cosmic repair, but the conflict also highlights that we haven't fully achieved that repair yet.
The violence perpetuates that spiritual brokenness, you're saying.
Right, and that's a key insight here.
Okay.
That true peace requires more than just political solutions. It requires a kind of spiritual awakening.
Okay.
A recognition of our shared humanity.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these pieces fit together.
Good.
So we've talked about the Jewish mystical perspective. What about Islamic mysticism?
Right.
What's the Sufi take on all of this?
Sufism offers a different but equally compelling perspective.
Okay.
For Muslims, Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque is incredibly significant. It's believed to be the site of the Prophet Muhammad's night journey.
Right, where he ascended to heaven.
Exactly.
A pretty amazing story.
It is, and mystically speaking,
Okay.
the conflict over Jerusalem can be seen as this battle between the ego's attachment to the physical world and the spiritual imperative to transcend those attachments.
So it's not just about who controls the land,
Right.
but about this inner struggle within each person.
Precisely. It's about recognizing those ego-driven desires for control and possession that fuel so much of the conflict. Sufism teaches that true peace comes from letting go of those desires, from recognizing our interconnectedness with all things.
That makes me think of the Sufi concept of Tawhid, the unity of all creation.
Yes.
In that context, the conflict represents a failure to recognize that we're all part of the same fabric.
Exactly. We've allowed divisive ideologies, fear and anger to overshadow that fundamental truth of unity.
Right.
It's like we're all looking at different threads in a tapestry instead of seeing the whole picture.
Okay, so how does the idea of jihad fit into all of this?
Right.
Isn't that often associated with violence and war?
That's the common perception.
Yeah.
But in its mystical sense, jihad represents an inner battle against the lower self, the ego.
Okay.
It's about purifying the heart and striving for spiritual excellence.
So are you saying that the true way to resolve this conflict from a Sufi perspective is to first conquer the inner demons?
It's not that simple, of course, but there's wisdom in that idea.
Okay.
If both sides were to approach the conflict with that kind of inner awareness, with a commitment to overcoming the ego's need to dominate and control, imagine how the conversation might shift.
That's a powerful thought. So we've got ancient roots. We've got modern clashes.
Right.
We've got layers of mystical meaning.
Yeah.
But we also have to talk about money. A little uncomfortable to think about.
It's essential to acknowledge that conflicts don't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
They're intertwined with economic realities, and the Israel-Palestine conflict is no exception.
Okay.
In fact, you could argue that the financial dimension is yet another layer of this alchemical crucible we're exploring.
How so?
Well, think about it. Historically speaking, early Zionist settlements were largely funded by wealthy Jewish families, like the Rothschilds. From the very start, you have this connection between wealth and ideology.
So even back then, money was shaping the reality on the ground.
Yes, and that continues today.
Okay.
There are significant economic disparities between Israel and Palestine.
Right.
Israel has a thriving economy, a strong tech sector, while Palestine struggles with poverty and unemployment.
I remember seeing those disparities when I was traveling in the region a few years back. The difference in infrastructure.
Yeah.
The access to resources. It was striking.
And those disparities reflect broader patterns of colonialism. With Israel benefiting from advanced infrastructure and global investments, while Palestine faces blockades and dependency on international aid, these historical and economic realities create this power imbalance that further fuels the conflict.
So it's not just about ancient claims to the land. It's this very real material dimension of money that's also at play.
Exactly. And then there are the contemporary financial implications to consider, both globally and for individuals.
Right.
Instability in the Middle East, for example, can disrupt global oil supplies, driving up prices and contributing to inflation around the world.
So what happens in that region really does impact us all.
It does. And then you have the defense industry.
Okay.
U.S. defense contractors benefit greatly from military aid to Israel, which raises ethical questions for investors who may unknowingly be profiting from the conflict.
That's a sobering thought. When donating to causes in the region.
Yes. It's crucial to research and understand where your money is going.
Right.
And to ensure your donations align with your values.
So we've got this tangle of global economics, corporate interests, individual choices.
It's complex.
They're all woven into the fabric of this conflict.
Right.
It's a lot to consider, but I'm curious, how do those mystical traditions we were talking about view wealth and money? Do they have anything to say about this side of things?
That's a great question, and it's here that the mystical and the material truly intersect.
Okay.
Both Jewish and Islamic mysticism view wealth as a form of spiritual energy. It can be used for good through charitable giving, or it can be misused, perpetuating negativity and imbalance.
So even our financial decisions can be seen through this spiritual lens.
Absolutely. It encourages us to think about our financial decisions, not just in terms of personal gain, but also in terms of their impact on the world around us.
So instead of just asking, how much money can I make?
Right.
We should also be asking, how can I use my money to contribute to a more just and peaceful world?
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Good.
We've got ancient beliefs and modern realities, spiritual and financial dimensions, all intertwined in this incredibly complex conflict.
It is complex.
But what does it all mean for us as individuals?
Right.
What can we learn from all of this?
That's the key question, isn't it? And surprisingly, there are some really insightful personal finance lessons to be gleaned from all of this.
Personal finance lessons from ancient mystical traditions. I'm all ears.
Well, let's start with how nations handle their finances.
Okay.
They have to allocate resources to things like defense, social programs, infrastructure, all while trying to reach these long-term goals.
We're all trying to find that balance.
Both scenarios involve making conscious choices about how we use our resources. And just like a nation facing unexpected challenges, we need to be prepared for the ups and downs of the financial markets.
Yeah.
The volatility of the Israel-Palestine conflict mirrors this, wouldn't you say?
It does seem like one day the market is soaring and the next it's plummeting.
Right.
So you're saying we can learn from this conflict about the importance of being financially and emotionally resilient.
Precisely. Having emergency funds, diversifying investments,
Right.
and even cultivating emotional resilience are all crucial. It's about being prepared for those inevitable setbacks.
Okay, I can see that. But how about those mystical principles themselves? You mentioned they offer insights into personal finance. Can you give me a specific example?
Absolutely. Let's take tikkun olam, the idea of repairing the world.
Right.
How do you think that might apply to personal finance?
Well, it makes me think about ethical investing.
Okay.
Choosing to invest in companies that align with my values. Maybe those working to create positive change?
Right.
Rather than just focusing on the highest returns.
Exactly. You become a part of the solution.
Yeah.
And then there's the Sufi concept of detachment.
Uh-huh.
Remember we talked about how it's about not over-identifying with material possessions?
Right. Finding that inner peace that's not dependent on external things.
This can be applied to your spending habits. Mindful spending.
Okay.
Resisting consumerism.
Yeah.
Focusing on what truly matters. It's a powerful antidote to that constant need for more, more, more.
I love it. It's like a spiritual minimalism almost.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And finally, think about the cycle of exile and return that we see throughout the history of this conflict.
Okay.
Financial setbacks are inevitable too, right?
Definitely those things happen to all of us at some point.
But just like the Jewish people's journey back to Israel, we can view these setbacks as temporary exiles, opportunities to learn and grow and eventually return stronger.
So it's about shifting our perspective.
Yeah.
Seeing those challenges as chances for transformation.
Yes, cultivating resilience and remembering that those setbacks were just a natural part of the journey.
It's amazing how we can find wisdom in the most unexpected places.
It really is.
Even in the midst of something as complex and challenging as the Israel-Palestine conflict. And what if we learn from this exploration? It feels like we've uncovered so much from the intertwining of ancient beliefs and modern realities to the spiritual and financial dimensions of conflict.
It is a lot.
What's the key takeaway for our listener?
I think the Israel-Palestine conflict in many ways reflects humanity's deepest struggles.
Okay.
Unity versus division, ego versus the higher self, our attachment to material things versus the desire for something more.
Right.
It's a reminder that these struggles aren't just over there,
Right.
but exist within each of us.
And for us as Americans, it really highlights how interconnected we are with the rest of the world, right?
Absolutely. From financial markets to humanitarian crises, what happens in that region impacts us all. But more than that, the conflict, when viewed through this lens, offers this metaphorical lesson in resilience, balance, and ethical living. We can take those mystical principles we've discussed and apply them to our own lives, even to our financial decisions.
It's about choosing peace even in our own little corner of the world.
And it reminds me that saying, think globally, act locally. Even small individual choices can contribute to a more harmonious world.
If this land truly is an alchemical crucible, what does it mean for humanity that this struggle continues?
Yeah.
Is there a way to transmute all this pain and violence into something positive?
Those are the questions we're left with.
Psychic stocks. Belief shapes finance.